Interested in determining the percent of population who believed in God. And by the way, I'm sorry, I should start with this. We're going to talk about bias scenarios here. And so interested in determining the percent of the population who believed in God, a surveyor stood outside of a church on Sunday morning and asked all of the congregants a neutrally worded question. I'm sure he was thinking about whether or not they believe in God. And I'm sure his reason for doing this is he's like, hey, we have people who talk about God, so I'm going to go there. And the question is, will this survey produce biased results? And of course, it obviously will. So this is a case of selection bias, where we're going to overrepresent those who believe in God, and those who do not believe in God are underrepresented. Why? Because most people who attend church or a mosque or synagogue or other religious place have a belief in God. So the type of bias, obviously we have selection bias because we have a bad design, and the type of bias, and we actually have the potential for two. We obviously have undercoverage bias, where those that do not believe in God are not likely to be at a church. So we undercovered them. We did not include them in the survey, or adequately include them in the survey. And then there's also the potential of response bias, because if I'm outside of the church for any reason and I'm surveyed and I hear everyone else saying they believe in God, I may feel pressured to say that I believe in God because of those who are around me. All right. So basically, response bias, because to me it was a sensitive question because everyone around me was pressuring me, or I felt pressured. All right. This actually was an FRQ back in 2008 on bias. A local school board plans to conduct a survey of parents' opinions about year-round schooling in elementary school. The school board contacts 500 of the families by mail, and I'm going to tell you that at 500 families, that's a pretty decent sized survey. I know y'all don't know that yet, but that's a good sized survey by mail. I'm going to assume that this is a random selection of families. So I'm going to assume that the 500 families that I am contacting represents the school district, and the survey questions provided below. A proposal has been submitted that would require students in elementary schools to attend a school on a year-round basis. Do you support this proposal? Yes or no? And I'm going to say that particular question, although I have an opinion, is pretty neutrally worded. I don't see that it's slanted in favor of offering school year-round, or not slanted that way. And I also want to say, if it said yes, no, maybe, or no opinion, that would be fine as well. So it didn't just have to be yes or no. It could have been yes, no, no opinion, or maybe. All right? Those could have been included in the answers. So the school board received from 98 of the families. So we hear from 98 of the families, but we know that we had 500 who actually were contacted. So basically, when they asked right away what type of bias is included in the survey, type of bias is non-response bias. All right? In that only 98 out of 500 families responded to the survey. So I always need to say, hey, why there's bias? Well, 98 out of the 500 did not respond, or only 98 out of the 500 did respond. So that means 402 didn't. And based on the fact that 76 of the responses indicated support for year-round, it's likely the opinions of parents who were most in favor were the ones that were overrepresented, and those who were not in favor of it were not well represented. The next part is, could we contact another 500 families and add their data to the original results? We cannot dilute bias. I mean, yes, the bias may be diluted, but it's still there. So consequently, this is not a reasonable solution. So increasing the sample size still means that we still have the bias data from the first survey, which would throw it off. Basically, the proportion would not be accurate. So we can't fix biased data. and sample size. Increasing sample size fixes a lot of things, but it won't fix bias. So name two ways to address the bias in the survey. Well, there are 402 families who did not respond, and maybe mail was not the most effective way. So maybe that points to the fact that my execution was a problem. And maybe I can get their responses if I go knock on their doors or if I follow up with a phone call. So maybe I can get those who didn't respond to respond by using other techniques. That would be acceptable because that was my original sample, and I got the 402 who didn't participate to come back and participate. The other option is to create a completely new survey using a different method, all right? Or using something that would be more effective. But we cannot have that large of a population, a proportion of the sample not responding. Don't ask me what proportion we want. We really want 100%. But that's where another area of statistics comes into play. All right, so that's beyond this course. Another bias scenario. At a certain university, students who live in the dormitories eat at a common dining hall. Recently, some students have been complaining about the quality of the food served there. I'm sure that that's always the case. The dining hall manager decided to do a survey to estimate the proportion of students living in the dormitories who think that the quality of the food should be improved. One evening, the manager asked the first 100 students entering the dining hall to answer the following question. So this is really important. He chose the first 100 students, and we need to think to ourselves, might there be something different about the first 100 students? And we'll continue on. Many students, this is their question, many students believe that the food served in the dining hall needs improvement. That seems slanted. Do you think that the quality of food served here needs improvement, even though that would increase the cost? We'll come back to that. And then yes, no, no opinion. First off, the yes, no, no opinion, that's perfectly fine. That question is a little bit, has some issues. So part A, in this setting, explain how bias may have been introduced based on the way this convenient sample is collected. Well, the first 100 students who eat in the dining hall may have very different opinions than those that came later. For instance, and by the way, you make the statement, but then you need to come up with some reason. It just needs to be reasonable. Everyone's going to have different responses on the second part, but the first 100 may not be represented. That's the first thing I need to say. Then I need to say it's likely the food is fresher when the first 100 students arrive, and it's likely the first 100 students have a more positive attitude about the food, as evidenced by the fact they're willing to arrive early. The first 100 are probably hungrier, and food tastes better when you're really hungry. The first 100 are actually excited about their food, maybe they're freshmen, and they rush to get to the cafeteria because they really enjoy it. I don't need all of those, I just need one of those. So I need to say the first 100 may have different opinions. Then I need to give a reason why, and it just needs to be plausible. You may have a completely different reason than mine, and that is fine. In this setting, explain how bias may have been introduced on the way the question was worded. So let's look back at the question. We have many students believe. So that sounds like we have peer pressure. And then we say, even though that would increase the cost. Well, the question was, what they wanted to know is whether or not food needed to be improved. They didn't need to know whether you wanted to pay for more expensive food. They just wanted to know whether you thought the food needed to be improved. So bias introduced by including the phrase many students believe, which could cause many students to go along with the norm saying yes rather than giving their own opinion. In other words, that you felt pressured. So that would be a type of response bias because you made the question sensitive because you now want to be part of the group. You don't want to be left out. Bias also introduced by including the phrase even though that would increase the cost of the meal planning. A cost consideration is included, and students may think that the food is awful but are unwilling or unable to pay for more meals. So they're like, no, I'm not willing to do that. and you don't have the answer as to whether or not the food needs to be improved, from those students, you have the answer of the food may need to be fixed, but I'm not willing to pay for it. So you have, I'm not willing to pay for more expensive food. And the third question is, how could this question have been worded differently? Well, if they just wanted to know the opinion of students' food quality, the question could be worded, do you think that the quality of the food served here needs improvement? And if you just said, and if all you wrote on part C was, do you think the quality of food served here needs improvement? I think that would be a great response, all right? Make sure you don't say, do you think the food quality of the food here stinks? Because that has too much of a slant. But you need to say something, do you think that we need to change the quality of the food here? Something very simple and that's not inflammatory and does not get people excited. Just a simple question, make sure it's simple worded and it's not leading. All right, that's our bias FRQs.